Good morning. My name is Brian Wheeler, Director of Communications for the City of Charlottesville. Welcome to Cville360, a program to inform and engage the Charlottesville community. During the coronavirus pandemic, the city's leadership knows you want to hear from us frequently about our actions. We also want to hear from you and to provide opportunities for engagement. We've launched this program on our streaming sites, Comcast Channel 10, and on a companion Zoom webinar, so you can tune in live and on demand while practicing social distancing. The webinar allows you to join the broadcast and ask questions of our guest. If you want to try the webinar, visit charlottesville.gov/Zoom for the registration information. A link to each show appears at the bottom of the page. At the top of each program, we'll have a brief update on the state of the coronavirus and the city's response. And today we will hear from Deputy Fire Chief Joe Powers, who joins us via the webinar. The remainder of the program will focus on a review of last night's City Council meeting and will be joined in the studio by City Manager Tarron Richardson and by Vice Mayor Sena Magill, who will join us via webinar. Again, on the webinar, you can type your questions in the Q&A module, or you can click the raise your hand icon and I'll bring you onto the program to speak directly to our guest. So let me show you our guest in a panel view here. And there we have all our guests. Can everybody hear us okay? Deputy Chief Powers, Vice Mayor Magill, great. So we're going to start with Deputy Chief Powers, who will give us an update on the city's coronavirus response. Good morning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you for inviting me back. I'm the Deputy Fire Chief for Community Risk Reduction for the city's fire department, and also the Incident Commander for COVID-19 management team here in the city. For about a month now, we've been working on recovery efforts to really support our community to make sure that they have everything that we need. And we joined forces with the Chamber of Commerce last week in two projects. The first project is rebuilding nonprofits and community organizations. And the second project is the preparing vital infrastructure to really understand where we need to go as a city and how we can support everybody moving forward. We have 5 COVID-19 strategic goals that we use as a incident management team. The first is provide essential services with additional goals as protect and support vulnerable populations, protect and support the first responders and other direct service providers, sustain the healthcare system by flattening the curve, and prepare and plan for community support and recovery. So as of May 5th, today, and according to the Thomas Jefferson COVID-19 dashboard, which you can find online, the Thomas Jefferson Health District is reporting 139 total cases of the virus with 13 fatalities. 63 of those cases were in the city of Charlottesville, with 110 in the county of Albemarle. Yesterday, Governor Northam announced that he is extending Executive Order 53, which again closed non-essential businesses, and that extension goes through May 14th of next week. Likewise, Executive Order 55, the stay-at-home order, will align with the same date. COVID is still spreading in our communities, and we still ask you to stay home. Please stay home, wash your hands frequently, and use face coverings when you're in the public. The efforts that we've done over the past several weeks and months have reduced the community's impact of the virus, and we're making good headway. The governor's announcement yesterday is not a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's more of an opportunity. It's a turn in our response. Provides new opportunities for our communities to come together and begin to recover. The community is very resilient. The city of Charlottesville is ready for recovery, and we're here to support everybody in those efforts. We're working closely with the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy at UVA. The Batten School is known for solving tough problems in public policy with a focus on ethics and multidisciplinary approaches. The study that we're working with is called the Community Vulnerability Needs Assessment. The study investigates how COVID-19 affected the livelihood, food security, education, housing, healthcare, sanitation, information, and transportation of vulnerable populations within the Charlottesville area. And then it helps us prioritize the response and recovery efforts. The Batten School is also developing action plans for sharing information and identifying funding. And recently it's expanding its study into the greater Thomas Jefferson Health District area. A short update on personal protective equipment in our community. The National Guard continues to work throughout the Charlottesville and Albemarle area, training and fitting N95 respirators to skilled nursing care facilities. And over this week, working with point of care providers such as dentists, urgent cares, and doctors' offices. Another regional effort is underway by Human Services in both the city and the county, and even partners in the health district, where they have taken delivery of thousands of cloth reusable face masks and delivered thousands of these cloth face masks to organizations like the Community Redevelopment Housing Authority, the Piedmont Housing Alliance, the Haven, the African American Pastors Council, the local food pantries, and the Habitat for Humanity. So lastly, I want to say is please, please, please keep an eye out for your family and friends. Connect with them often. Sometimes it's easy as a text, a phone call, or even FaceTime. Remember that our mental health is just as important as our physical health. And again, wash your hands and limit your exposure to other people. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Chief. You covered a lot of ground there. And I'm curious a little bit more information maybe about the governor's decision yesterday to talk about reopening and taking a phased approach. I mean, what goes through your mind as the city's incident commander? And you're on top of the health district data here locally and in the state. So it seems like we're seeing still a lot of new cases be identified. And how do you reconcile the cases being identified with the governor's interest as of next Thursday in relaxing some of these restrictions?
Well, we see an increase in cases as we see an increase in testing. So we have to be cognizant that the more people that we test, the more cases we're going to see. But we do need to understand that the number of cases, the number of positive cases to the percentage of tests help us understand the relative to the total population, how many folks are really have COVID and are testing positive. But the governor said that it's a three-phased approach to recovery. And if we do a little bit of research and we follow kind of what the city has been planning for almost a month now, whitehouse.gov released a three-phased approach about 3 to 4 weeks ago. And it shows each of the individual phases and what we can relax our restrictions on. So we're looking forward to what the governor does, and we're monitoring it very closely here at the health district level. And the city of Charlottesville has worked very, very hard in planning, each of our departments planning to take the first steps into recovery.
Thank you. And it's as I look around at the community I see as I come to work each day, it does seem like people are relaxing a little bit, in that I'm seeing more cars on the road. I'm seeing fewer people wearing masks. And, nationally we hear that it's the public, it's difficult to keep up these measures for everyone. I mean, we're all getting cabin fever and looking for ways to get out and do the things we used to do. We do have some questions coming in, Chief, and I'll get to one of them in just a second. If you have a question and you're on the webinar, you can type it in the Q&A module, or you can raise your hand and I'll bring you into the conversation. We are having our staff monitor Facebook as well. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, they are copying in some of those questions. One that's come in from Facebook relates to city parks and whether they will remain closed after next week. We have the city manager here. He could address this as well, but Chief Powers, let's start with you. Any information about something as specific as the parks at this point?
So we've talked with Parks and Rec at length at what stages we can start to reopen, and we haven't finalized any of those yet. But I do expect to see some of the services throughout the city start to open up with phase one. But maybe the city manager can talk a little bit more about it. Then we're going to be continually to talk to the parks, to utilities to public works to all of our departments to make sure that we all have a good understanding of what phase one looks like and what phase two looks like.
And while we've got you on with us right now, Chief Powers, the other things about human services and vulnerable populations, I know you wanted to give an update there, and one thing I'll just mention is that today is Giving Tuesday, and so those of you watching, if you are able to be charitable at this point, a great opportunity to give to nonprofits that are working hard to serve our vulnerable populations in the community. And if you aren't sure which nonprofit to support, you can always support the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation, and they are also leading the way in local philanthropy. But Chief Powers, what else can you tell us about what our Human Services team is doing?
So they took delivery of 30,000 masks several weeks ago, and they're also working with 100 Black women of Charlottesville, of the Charlottesville metro area, to make sure that we're getting masks to reusable masks, and not just one, but one or two, so that when one is in the wash, those folks can still have a mask to wear in public. And we're making sure that we get them out to the people that are most at risk, because we don't want to continue the spread. We need to continue to mitigate it, and we want to make sure that the people that need some help are getting the help that they need. And big thank you to the Human Services, both here in the city and in Albemarle County, and the Health District for this. This really, it's a monumental event.
And here in the studio, City Manager Tarron Richardson. Dr. Richardson, what can you tell the community about our current posture for City Hall, which is closed, I think, through Sunday, May 24th at this point, but we're seeing some, new movement from the governor's office. What are you thinking about at this point?
Following in lockstep with the governor at this time, we do have City Hall closed until the 24th, and we want to continue down that path. What we do have, as Chief was talking about, is our recovery transition plan and going into phase one, and what will that look like. We're still working on that plan, and we'll be working with the directors to be able to finalize that plan and then be able to present that to council and then move forward. But it takes a lot of work and effort, because there's a lot of things that we have to look at in terms of how we retrofit the buildings, and then how do we start moving our people back into the workplace. And that's going to be a phased approach. Right.
We're talking here on the downtown mall in the Charlottesville Community Media Center. That's just one facility of the city of Charlottesville. But I know Chief Powers will be interviewing my team about how we bring this back into service for the public. We've been able to use it to keep these conversations going, because it's critical that the community get information. But thinking about the public and our producers and directors coming back in the studio and recording new shows, we have to think about the safety of our employees and also the public.
And that is our number one priority, to make sure that we're taking care of everyone in the community. We have to remain people focused, and we want to make sure everyone is safe as we do this phased approach to open back up our city.
And there was some discussion last night, we'll get into it with Vice Mayor Magill, but about the Planning Commission and whether it should start having meetings again. Again, a safety issue when we think about our staff and the work they would have to do to come back into City Hall and get the machinery of government going again on the Planning Commission agenda.
Yes. So that's going to still, it's going to take some time. It's not like turn on a light switch and everything just happens all at once. It's like I said, it's going to be a phased approach, and we want to make sure everyone is safe when we start back working back in our different buildings. So we want to ensure that everything is taken care of before that happens, rather than getting everybody back and then trying to take on these various steps to make sure everyone is safe.
Let's go back to Deputy Chief Powers. Chief, you heard that conversation and thinking about recovery and those conversations you've had with different department directors. And we've talked about it on the program before, but I think repetition is a good thing in this situation. We always have different viewers watching the show, watching it on demand. Tell us a little bit about those conversations and maybe give us some anecdotes about a department that really is going to have some challenges when it comes to going back to business.
Yeah, so there's, not everything is good that comes on a spreadsheet, but we've taken all of these conversations and put them into different spreadsheets, though, so that we can compare organizations and compare departments together to really start to understand where the efficiencies are that COVID has exploited, and allow us to take those efficiencies and move forward so that we can be a more efficient government. But we've also found where there's going to be some challenges moving into phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And we really got into the weeds to understand what the departments do on a daily basis before COVID hit our community, and how each of those programs and services changed. And then moving forward, how are we going to reintegrate those services back into the community, and what challenges are going to occur? For instance, social services expects to see a large increase in benefits applications. The City Hall front desk expects to see a large increase in even passport applications and driver's license, or the DMV select services. It's all of the things that we've all been waiting to do, sitting in our homes, and we can't get out and do, is where the city's going to start to experience some difficulty. And the nice thing is that we've been planning for this, and we've been talking about it and finding ways to overcome these challenges for about a month now. When we were well into mitigation, and before a lot of other cities and communities were looking at recovery, the city of Charlottesville was taking a proactive approach to start to discuss these really into the weeds discussions to make sure that each of our services was evaluated, and how we move forward with it moving into phase 1 and 2 and 3.
And so, Chief Powers, what I hear you saying is it's no time to back off on all the good work we've been doing as a community, wearing masks, practicing physical distancing. The reason the governor is able to even talk about a light at the end of the tunnel, as you said, is because we have been doing a good job. So we need to keep that going.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing now, and some of the frustration that we're seeing is in that the coronavirus doesn't seem to be as bad as everybody thought it was. I really believe is because we did a good job at pulling back. Our community followed some directions, and we took some steps to, as a community, took some steps to social distance, to stay away from each other, to stay at home, and to stop the virus spread. And we've done a good job, and we've got a little bit more time to continue to do it. And then we might see some relaxed restrictions here soon.
And any final thoughts before we sign off with you?
Wash your hands. Please wash your hands. That's one of the biggest pieces of guidance that has been put out to all the cities and communities throughout the country. We need to wash our hands and make sure that anytime we're touching hard surfaces, and we can clean those hard surfaces. But after we've touched it, wash your hands.
Thank you. So that was advice we got when this all began back in February, March, was keep washing our hands, think about the traditional flu and how we need to not be spreading that. And then we got into the coronavirus. So, Dr. Richardson, it's hard to believe. It seems like it's been a long, long time, but it really has just been a couple months that we've been dealing with this. The business of the city government continues. The budget is a big part of our work right now. Last night, City Council had a meeting. So let's bring in Vice Mayor Sena Magill, who's making her first appearance on the show. Welcome, Vice Mayor Magill. Can you hear us?
I can. Thank you, Brian.
Great. We can hear you as well. Let's start, because I know one of the first questions, if I don't ask it, is going to be, is everything okay with Mayor Walker? Because she made an unexpected exit from the meeting last night. So what can you tell us and the community?
Yes, I texted Mayor Walker after the meeting. She is fine. There was just one of the problems of doing this at home is that if something goes wrong in the background at home, you have to deal with it. So she had a family emergency and needed to take care of it, but everything is fine now.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you. And, you then became the chair of the meeting. And, usually the vice mayor, the vice chair they can prepare for an event like that. They know that the presiding officer's going to be taking a vacation or going to be on a business trip, or they're sick and they call that morning and say, I can't do it tonight. You had no time to prepare. And I don't know that I've ever seen that in the middle of a council meeting. So what was that like?
Well, considering it was also my first time, it was great. Attorney John Blair is wonderful for helping through process. Councilor Hill was also there kind of helping with her experience, having been vice mayor and having been on council now for 2 years. So I felt in good hands, and I'm not afraid of making mistakes and then saying, okay, well, sorry, wasn't that, should have done this. So it was, a little bit nerve-wracking at first, but, after a few minutes, it was all good.
Well, I didn't detect any mistakes. It seemed like you pivoted really well, and so thank you for leading us through the second part of the evening last night. One of the things we talked about heading into the show, Vice Mayor Magill, was that we weren't sure we'd have a lot to talk about, recapping what we thought was going to be a brief city council meeting. And it turns out I think we probably have plenty to talk about. And so I'm really glad you're here. I'm glad Dr. Richardson's here. And, the agenda last night was community development block grant funding. We had to change that plan, move some funding, accept some federal funds related to coronavirus support. So that was the nuts and bolts of the meeting. But then we also got into the budget, the school's budget. That featured an appearance by Rosa Atkins, who joined our superintendent, who joined the webinar on short notice. And then we also had a lengthy conversation about boards and commissions. So why don't we start on the budget? And what I'd like to do is just show a few slides and have Dr. Richardson give a quick overview of where we are as a city and where we're heading when it comes to decisions council needs to make. Dr. Richardson.
Yes, as you can see, that the initial budget that we proposed was about $196 million. Then, with all the things that happened with the rapid onset of COVID-19 and the, I'll say, rapid downturn in the economy, we had to make some significant adjustments to our budget to make sure that we were making the necessary adjustments in terms of our revenues and what they would look like, and then looking at adjusting our overall expenditures as a city and trying to be, as prudent as possible in terms of managing our overall budget. So we had to take that down to about $191 million. And now we have about a $5 million gap from where we were when we first started. So the plan was, and as I talked to our budget team and revenue teams, was to basically look at going back to our FY20 expenditure budget. And that's where we are today. And we are hoping as the sooner or later that the economy will pick up and we'll be able to make some of the necessary adjustments through amendments throughout the fiscal year.
And on the screen right now, the public can see that the tax rates are going to remain the same as last fiscal year. In the case of the real estate rate, the last calendar year. But some of those revenue drivers that the city's looking at very closely and tracking carefully, sales tax, meals tax, lodging tax. If people are not out and if people are not visiting the community, then those revenues are going to go down. And then the business and professional licenses. So those things all contribute to that revised revenue picture.
That's it. And when you look at it in terms of that decrease with sales, meals, and lodging, that's about $2.3 million right there. And then when you look at the BPOL or business, professional, and license revenue dollars that we would receive, we're taking that down to about another basically $2.1 million. So as you mentioned, we've got to ensure that when things start to open back up, that people are actually coming back to the community where we can pick up where we are seeing those sharp decreases in our revenue streams.
And as we look at the expenditures in the proposed budget, that's going to be coming forward both to a community meeting tomorrow with council,
Yes.
and then to a May 18th public hearing. Here are some of those key things we have to figure out. Departmental budgets have been asked to stay at the previous year's levels, and so that's a $2.6 million decrease.
Yes.
The schools also will be asked to stay at the fiscal year 20 level. That's $2.1 million from their proposal for this year. And then we're shifting funds to a reserve fund, and that seems to have a lot of support by council to make sure we're setting aside some of those funds that we don't need to spend this year. So in the case of capital projects that we can defer the start for a year,
That's right.
those were funded by cash. That's a good amount of money we can set aside
Yes.
to just prepare for any contingency.
That is correct.
And then let's just put up that last slide, which relates to the budget calendar, just so we can get these dates on everyone's mind. Again, May 4th was last night. That was the city council meeting. May 6th, tomorrow, is a budget work session with community input. That starts at 4 o'clock. You can register to provide input to council by going to charlottesville.gov/Zoom and get the registration information for the webinar. And then May 18th, the next regular council meeting on a Monday night, is a public hearing on the budget. That will also be a virtual meeting. And then June 1st is when City Council will approve a budget, and that location is to be determined.
Yes.
Could be in City Hall, we'll see, but we've obviously figured out how to do virtual meetings. Let's go back to Vice Mayor Magill. So, Ms. Magill, with that sort of overview, what were some of the takeaways for you last night as we talked about the budget?
I think the biggest takeaway is what Councilor Payne stated. Right now, there are no good choices, just good decisions. There's a lot of unknowns. I'm applauding our city staff coming together and working through as many scenarios as possible. We know that the schools are cutting. We know that all the departments are cutting. And right now we're just doing our best to look out for the people of Charlottesville in for now and in the future.
And last night when we got into the schools budget, it felt for me as the host of the webinar, and I'm not just trying to add some humor to the situation here, but the school division's got some tough decisions in front of them on the budget, and I felt like it was how to be a millionaire, what that show where you're doing a lifeline and calling for help. And we put out the call to Superintendent Atkins, and she quickly joined the webinar and got on and explained the funding situation they're in. But they're looking at $2.3 million in cuts. They've already made $1 million in cuts, she said, that she's recommending to the school board, and then they're going to receive $1.2 million in CARES federal funding. So when she was pushed last night and said, well, how much more do you think you will ask for? She basically said $100,000 if all those things come together. So that's the positive way to look at it, that it could be just $100,000 more. But she also made it clear that they're watching carefully sales tax revenues from the state, lottery proceeds from the state, and that all those things are important to their budget, just like the city. The schools have to pass a balanced budget. And she wanted to make clear to City Council that they may have to come back to you as early as July.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about what you heard on that front.
I guess what I was hearing was there's this 2.3 million in cuts in general that they're short. The CARES money, they could be more than that depending on whether or not how much of the state taxes and lottery money goes down. Again, they're in the same boat that we're in. There's so much, because this pandemic is hitting across the country, it's affecting all sorts of things. Sales tax all of Virginia has a pretty big tourist industry, especially with the beaches, with the historic areas. People who go to visit DC often will stay in Northern Virginia and visit Northern Virginia as well. There's a lot here that brings people from all over, and we're not going to see that this year. So much is up in the air. And I think Dr. Atkins is trying to be cautious and not put too much faith of her budget in a huge recovery. I think we are definitely, this is my first budget season, and it was hard enough before, and now you throw in that we're looking at making sure we keep as many jobs as possible of people who are already employed, both with the city and the schools. That we're looking to take care of our students as they start school next year, hoping that they start in August as normal, and that our students, as many students are engaging as possible right now with their teachers, but it's really difficult. I mean, I'm working from home and checking in with my daughter, and rarely can she actually finish a full day of the schoolwork. So if you don't have that privilege of being able to stay home with your kid and kind of checking in on them, we're possibly looking at a deep dip. And I want to make sure that the school systems has the staff they need to fight that dip going forward in August and September. And all of that requires money, and this is an incredibly difficult time.
And it is, and I thought of the name of that program, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And I think we all do to get through this budget crisis. The superintendent will be joining the city council again tomorrow during the work session on the budget, so we'll be able to get some more information from the school division then. If you're watching on the webinar and you have a question for either Vice Mayor Magill or the City Manager, Tarron Richardson, just click the raise your hand icon. We'll bring you into the conversation, or you can type your question in the Q&A module and I'll ask it for you. We appreciate you watching and joining the program via the webinar. In the studio, Dr. Richardson, the school budget, what do we need to accomplish tomorrow when there's another work session opportunity with council?
I think the main thing is to allow the council to be able to have a discussion about our budget as well as the school's budget, and then to hear from the public, to hear what they think about our budget plan and what they want to see in the community. But to tell everyone, this is truly a difficult time because basically we would have adopted the FY21 budget by now. But what we're having to do is go back, and as I told the council, what we're doing now is looking at the overall revenues and expenditures on a weekly basis with the revenue and budget teams, and then providing them with an update on a monthly basis about where we are in terms of our revenues and to see if there's any changes. But we're working, as I mentioned, we should have been adopted the FY21 budget, but we're still working in FY20 to look at those changes in revenues where we once thought that we were going to be in the clear and then had some additional funds left over at the end of the year, but that doesn't seem to be the case now. Now we're also working on FY21 budget to get that moving and going with the various adjustments that had to be made to that, as we previously discussed about the changes from what was proposed and where we're at now today. And then by time we get really through that and then start talking about some of the amendments that may take place within the FY21 budget, we'll be starting the 22 budget very soon. So it's almost working on like 3 budgets at one time.
That's
so
a great point.
It's a very, very busy time, a very stressful time. But I have a good team. I have a good team of individuals who are working together to make sure that we get through these trying times. And hopefully this time next year we'll be back to normal and we're just adopting the FY22 budget and we're moving forward.
I think it's been clear in the conversations, both you, Dr. Atkins, City Council, the school board, really focused on supporting employees, whether it's their health and safety or their pocketbooks. And by not, laying off any staff and ensuring that we keep paying our employees to be safe and to telework as much as possible. So I think that's been great.
I always tell people, it's a difficult job being a manager, but it's also even more difficult when you have to worry about making payroll every 2 weeks. So that's been a huge challenge in terms of asking all of my directors and all of my managers and supervisors to look at your overall expenditures and look at ways that we can be as, I wouldn't say as frugal as possible, but to look at it in a way that we could look at managing our overall expenditures, because we don't know how long this may last. As we talked about before, we may go into phase 1 or phase 2, and then we may have to revert back to where we are if conditions end up going backwards. And I'm, praying that things continue to move in a progressive manner, and we continue to move forward. But like I said, it takes the work. It takes a lot of work on all of our parts to be able to ensure that we keep moving in the right direction.
And the biggest part of our budget is people and payroll and salaries.
That's
right?
it.
And that's true for the school division as well. I think one interesting thing about the school division that's a little different is the nature of teacher contracts, where they basically sign up all their teaching workforce for the year ahead of time, and then they're committing to those salaries. Whereas you as city manager have a little more flexibility throughout any given year to adjust to changing circumstances.
Yes.
I think that's probably a little harder for Superintendent Atkins. I'm sure she'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow as well.
And we have a very good relationship. We talk about different things that are going on within the district, and I tell her what's going on in the city, and we try to come to an agreement in a lot of different areas so that we can both move forward successfully.
Let's go back to Vice Mayor Magill. And Vice Mayor, what are you hoping to get out of tomorrow's work session? What's your goal for that meeting?
Well, this is going to be one of the first times that we're going to see the CIP budget, the proposed CIP budget, the proposed school budget, and the proposed general fund budget all together. And it's going to be bringing that big picture together. So it's what I look to see is what we're giving up. A lot of this reserve is coming from deferring our CIP budget. And what that's going to mean for the long run. I'm looking to see, is it going to cost us more in the long run to defer various things? What maintenance are we deferring? And just kind of how it all works together. It's one thing to see the various pieces. And I talk with my hands, and so being on Zoom, talking with your hands is not as easy. But looking at the different silos and then how the puzzle pieces there kind of interlock together to make the full picture.
And we're going to move on from the budget now, but if you do have a question, you can still raise your hand. You can type it in the Q&A module. Another part of the conversation at the end of last night's City Council meeting under other business related to the future of other boards and commissions. City Council has continued to meet virtually, and we figured out how to do that with a webinar that allows public participation. But as we think about other boards and commissions, the Planning Commission, the Board of Architectural Review, the Housing Advisory Committee, to name a couple, Ms. Magill, what did you get from that discussion, and where do we go next on making a decision about those bodies?
Well, as you know, Brian, we have, I believe it's 63 boards and commissions total. Not all of these are council appointed commissions, and not all of them are ones that meet on a regular basis or that meet in regards to the city of Charlottesville. Some of them we have appointed people on the boards, but they're actually a regional board, like the Region 10 board or the Thomas Jefferson Planning Commission board. However, Our boards and commissions are under FOIA, are under the FOIA Act, just as city council meetings are, which means we have to make sure they're noticed. We have to make sure the public is aware and has means of accessing the meeting, during the meeting, to submit questions and to have public comment. So to do this all virtually requires a lot of staff time, energy, and equipment. We can't be running them at the same time like we could in a live meeting. So council is trying to look at the various boards and commissions that we have, see which ones we would be responsible in assisting to meet virtually, and so then making sure, kind of prioritizing the various boards based on things that legally have to happen within a certain time period. Attorney Blair brought up a board last night that needed to be meeting coming up soon, and I have my notes here. I believe it was the executive board, but boards like,
Well, I know the Electoral Board got a lot of discussion last night.
it did. With the upcoming presidential election, we want to make sure, and also that there's going to be they're going to be having to pivot from their normal model this year of mostly people coming in person to potentially mostly people voting absentee. And that's going to mean a different level of staffing and a different type of staffing. So their board's going to have to be working on that. And so it's, how do we assist the boards that are meeting these timed deadlines? And also, what boards do we need to get moving also for our economic recovery? But knowing that we have limited amount of staff time to prioritize these. And also that we want to encourage the most amount of public participation, and knowing that virtual participation is limiting. It is not open to the entire community. Not everyone has access to good Wi-Fi, to a device that enables them to participate.
And Missy Creasy on our city staff is chiming in that it was the Board of Equalization that Mr. Blair was referring to, and that they were going to have a meeting coming up in June probably. Speaking of economic impacts, Dr. Richardson, Neil Williamson with the Free Enterprise Forum is asking a question. If the Planning Commission and Board of Architectural Review are not meeting, what kind of impact does that have on the local economy if new projects, if they're not breaking ground and getting things up and running? And has that been factored in to the budget in any way?
Yes, we have. That is something that we're currently working on to try to ensure that we are moving forward with our planning department to be able to get things moving. There are a lot of things that we needed to spruce up on in terms of our NDS department, and the number one thing is technology. If we had the necessary technology, we would be able to do a lot more than what we are able to do at this moment. So moving forward with the next budget, that is one of my key priorities with the limited funds that we do have, is to have the necessary technology in place where we can do a lot of online services, and we can move those type of projects forward that does have a heavy impact on our budget in terms of revenues.
And so that's like electronic submissions for plans and permits.
That's right.
Through neighborhood development.
That's right.
So that those can get reviewed and accepted online.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Other boards and commissions, Ms. Magill, one of the interesting things about the Electoral Board is that is not a board that's appointed by City Council, but as was pointed out by Mr. Blair last night, it's one that relies on city staff in a variety of ways, whether it's their facility, their office, ensuring, if we're doing something in November and there's snow, that the sidewalks are clear and voters can still get to the voting booth. Certainly my department will be available to help them meet. But that is one of those unexpected things. You know, I never would have put the Electoral Board on my list of things to worry about.
And yeah, I believe it's a 6-person board. I've actually been to the meetings before. And we also, one of our lines in our budget is supporting the Electoral Board. It's part of government. It's how we get our government elected. And especially in a presidential year in particular, it already ramps up. So we're expecting I know they're expecting a high turnout. They had a much higher turnout last year. The last couple of years, since 2016, actually, we've had much higher turnouts at local elections, which is a wonderful thing. But of course, during a pandemic, it's throwing a bunch of questions into how can we best help people vote and what resources is that going to take? And that's exactly what the board is going to need to meet to answer.
And I think it's interesting, you know, last night we heard from the Piedmont Environmental Council calling on the Planning Commission to continue to do business. We just heard from Neil Williamson with the Free Enterprise Forum. So both environmental groups and business groups are looking to the city and wanting to understand those next steps. So where does council take this discussion? I know last night you didn't want to come to any decisions. What do you think is going to happen next?
Yeah, last night was just our preliminary beginnings of talking. And again, since by that point, there was only the 4 counselors, and we wanted to be respectful that we were missing our mayor, and that we wanted a robust conversation with all 5 of us. Also, the reason of bringing that up was also to be very transparent in what we're talking about, and to hope that people would provide feedback from the public. I know this whole council is very dedicated to transparency and being open with our decision-making process. So, and hearing from the public about what boards and commissions we're really identifying as necessary going forward, because it's easy for one of us to possibly miss something. I mean, the city government is huge and it does so much. There's so many nooks and crannies to it that it's really important to hear from people on those boards and commissions, or people who are affected by those boards and commissions, so that we can make an educated decision about what we're going to prioritize going forward with our resources for electronic meetings.
I think that's a really good point. And, you know, Councilor Payne, both last night and at previous meetings, has made the case for, you know, you have picked a lot of experts to represent you on various boards and commissions. And right now they sort of feel like they're on the sidelines, and they could be helping brainstorm different solutions to the housing emergencies that our vulnerable populations are facing right now, or, you know, moving forward a new development that could be a plus for our budget down the road. So we will keep you posted on this program about where that conversation goes next, and please keep tuning in. As we finish up, Vice Mayor Magill, one of the burning questions on Twitter last night related to your feline companions. And so we need to get to the bottom of this. How many are there, and what are their names? Because I think I've seen 2 different tales in various videos.
Yes, a couple of weeks, yes, that was Otter and Paprika. Paprika is the black and white one who was normally with me. She and another tabby, Elliot, were just playing in the background. I was kind of afraid they were going to go at it while we were on speaker. No, there's 6 of them and a dog. There's a solid black one who goes around beating everybody else up. His name is Race Car. Then there was the little black and white one. Her name is Paprika. There are 2 tabbies. Otter, who was the one who's been swishing her tail in front of my face often she's the oldest. And then Elliot is also called Idiot. And then there's a tabby, or not a calico named Pieces, and a white and gray calico named Suki May.
So they're all
rescues.
The things we're learning about our counselors in their home offices And
Yes.
and you
Dog
also
is cherry pop.
you're also making some decorative changes in the background.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, so, so for years I was in the vintage and antiques business and collected art. And as we moved a couple of months ago, so a lot of the artwork has actually not been up yet. And we decided to have a little fun and start changing out the pictures behind me for every meeting.
All right, that'll give us something to look forward to. And what has it been like for you as a new member of council, constantly being on webinars?
Well, so I grew up without much technology. I didn't have a telephone or anything. And of course it was, pre-real computers up until, computers kind of started coming more popular in high school, but you basically had to have been a programmer or somebody who actually would have a home computer. I personally really dislike both talking on the telephone and talking via camera and webinar, but I'm much more of an in-person person, so this has taken a little bit of getting used to, but it's definitely better than it's better than nothing. And I'm definitely glad that we have this technology. Because just think about the 70s having to do all of this via conference call.
And what's it been like engaging with the public? Last night, I think by my count, we had about 14 speakers at different times during the evening. Some of them spoke multiple times, but there were 14 opportunities where a member of the public was speaking to City Council over the webinar. What's it been like on the receiving end for you as one member of council?
It's easy to forget that other people are listening to you. When you're on the dais, you see the people in front of you. But then listening to public comment, I always prefer to see people's faces and to engage with people. It's part of reading the whole picture. Again, my background's psychology, so I rely on not just the tone of voice and inflection in the words, but also the expressions on people's faces, and to hear the whole intent behind the conversation. So it's definitely different.
I think one thing I've noticed,
being in person.
The people who joined us last night, we all recognize their voices. They are regular participants. So sort of our regulars are coming back to the meeting and engaging with council. But there are not a lot of newcomers joining via the webinar.
Yeah. I am worried. I'm not seeing the same amount of participation on the virtual as I was in live. And it does worry me that we are not having as a robust representation across the city during our public comment, that we're not getting people from all over, and that it's just more difficult for people to engage in city council meetings right now. It's the other reason why we want to make sure our boards and commissions are meeting only the ones that we don't want any important information. And trying to explain this correctly, but we want to be careful that we want as much engagement as possible from the public. And so anything that we can save for an in-person time when it's safe to be in person again, we want to, so that we have as much representation.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Magill, for joining us on the program today. As we think about the upcoming meetings, I know we're doing everything possible to make this opportunity available to the public to participate. We definitely want them to participate tomorrow when we have council at 4 o'clock, so people can sign up for that webinar. And it sounds like, soon we'll be able to have meetings again. where people can fully participate face-to-face. So we'll look forward to those days, but we need to keep people safe, and that's our
key.
employees and the public. And so, you know, going back to the top of the show, when Deputy Chief Powers said we need to keep doing what we've been doing, that's why we're doing these things.
That's it.
Yep. The next program will be a week from today, next Tuesday at 11 a.m. and the topic to be announced. But we would like you to join us at tomorrow at 4 o'clock, and you can register at charlottesville.gov/Zoom to participate in tomorrow's council work session focused on the budget. They will be taking public comment. And then on Friday at 3 p.m., the Thomas Jefferson Health District will have another of their series of COVID-19 town halls. And again, you can log in via the webinar and ask questions of our local health experts about where we are with the coronavirus. Thank you for watching. Please reach out to me if you have any feedback about the program or ideas for future topics and guests. Thank you, and stay healthy.